right now. Let me get participants in. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another Third Place Books event live on Zoom. My name is Kalani, and I'm a bookseller with Third Place Books. For those of you who might not know us or who might be watching from around the country, we are a new and used independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. We really miss having author events inside our bookstores, but we are so thankful to have this virtual platform where we can still connect authors and readers together. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight and supporting us. I encourage you to please further show your support of us as a bookstore and your support of our great authors by visiting our website and making a purchase of both Michelle and EJ's book. I will be sharing links over in the comments throughout the event. I also do want to note at this time, we still do have a limited supply of signed copies of Crying in H Mart still available, so do make sure you make your purchase sooner than later. While you're on our website, we encourage you to also visit our events calendar. We've been hosting a number of other author events from all across the literary spectrum. Just next week, we are very excited to be hosting the new Andy Weir book, where he'll be in conversation with Neil Stevenson, among some other great events that we have. So please take a look at that event calendar and make sure to follow us on our social media accounts to stay in tune with what's going on with us. So we'll be starting this event here shortly after my introductions. We'll be here for about an hour. We will save time for some audience Q&A questions, so make sure you use that Q&A function down below here. Do stay engaged with the event, but we do ask you to use this Q&A box instead of the question box, please. So tonight we are very excited to be hosting this author event for Crying in H Mart. Crying in H Mart was one of those books that has been receiving a ton of buzz in the bookselling world for many months. I want to actually take a quick shout out to Katie Meehan, our Penguin Random House sales rep, who gave me a copy of this book several months ago and was very persistent in making sure I read it, but she was absolutely right. I did absolutely love this book. Many of my bookselling colleagues also loved it, which is why we picked the book as our Third Place Books signature read selection for our recently launched signed first editions subscription box. Subscribers received a signed copy of Crying in H Mart along with a specially made bookmark and a special gift, which this month was these special chopsticks made specially for the release of Crying in H Mart and our subscription box. It was very cool. So if you want to find out more about our subscription boxes, go to our website. If you are a current subscriber and you already have your copy of Crying in H Mart, please say hi in the chat box so I can give you a virtual high five or something. Thank you. But without further ado, I am very happy to introduce 2 Korean American authors here on this 3rd day of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Happy AAPI Heritage Month to you all. Michelle Zauner is now a New York Times bestselling author of her memoir, Crying in H Mart. This was, as I said, a book that I loved. It was a staff pick of mine. My staff pick shelf sign read, quote, "Like author Michelle Zauner, I also lost a parent in 2014. While reading Crying in H Mart, I was vividly transported back to that time through Zauner's careful writing, reliving the same pain and grief, but also deeply feeling the powerful love of family that emerges from such difficult times. This is a beautiful, emotional memoir that captures the heartbreak of losing a parent perfectly." Michelle, of course, is also known as the indie pop singer and guitarist Japanese Breakfast, who has won acclaim for her music around the world. Japanese Breakfast's new album, Jubilee, comes out on June 4th. And as a special treat tonight, Michelle is joined in conversation with Seattle author and friend of Third Place Books, EJ Ko. EJ is the author of the absolutely beautiful memoir, The Magical Language of Others. I got my copy right here. This was another staff pick of mine. I love this book. But more importantly, it was also the winner of the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Award and was also a book that Time magazine raved about, calling it, quote, "a moving portrait of abandonment, forgiveness, and the strength of maternal love." She is also an editor, translator, and poet. You can also follow her on her social media accounts at thisisejco, where earlier this week she tweeted out this great line here about this event saying, quote, "She is ready to ugly cry about Korean moms with @jbrecky." I'm also ready to ugly cry about Korean moms myself. So with that, I'm going to hide myself and mute myself, and please take it away, Michelle and EJ.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start with a short reading. This is towards the end of the book when I visit my in-laws in Bucks County for Thanksgiving, and I discover photographs left behind in my mother's old kimchi refrigerator. In the old playroom where we spent the night at Peter's parents', I took the photographs out and went through them again while Peter was sleeping. My favorites were the mistakes, once of my mother, that were objectively bad. Her eyes closed, accidentally blinking and unaware. An impromptu photo shoot at the local Rite Aid to finish off the reel. Smiling and posing in front of the cardboard Valentine's Day decor, standing beside a coin-operated kiddie ride, the aisle of wine bottles, the lawn chair display. A surprise shot at the garage door halfway through closing the trunk of her white Isuzu Trooper. It's like I'm there, watching her edge along the driver's side and come around the car to unload groceries into the house, wearing large sunglasses, as always, her mouth halfway open as if in mid-sentence. I can hear her call to me to put down the camera. Candid photos where she's not composed, where she sits on the couch and I can see her affection radiating toward me, unaware, my back turned as I open a gift from Unmi, leaning back in a chair about to take a sip of beer, sitting on the living room carpet of our old home, watching something off camera, her nightgown falling off one of her shoulders. I can see the vaccination scar on her upper arm, the one that looked like she'd been burned by a car lighter, how it stoked all her fears that I too would have scars someday, that it was her duty to protect me from everything I might regret. She was my champion. She was my archive. She had taken the utmost care to preserve the evidence of my existence and growth, capturing me in images, saving all my documents and possessions. She had all knowledge of my being memorized. The time I was born, my unborn cravings, the first book I read, the formation of every characteristic, every ailment and little victory. She observed me with unparalleled interest and inexhaustible devotion. Now that she was gone, there was no one left to ask about these things. The knowledge left unrecorded died with her. What remained were documents and my memories, and now it was up to me to make sense of myself, aided by the signs she left behind. How cyclical and bittersweet for a child to retrace the image of their mother, for a subject to turn back to document their archivist. I had thought fermentation was controlled death. Left alone, a head of cabbage molds and decomposes. It becomes rotten, inedible. But when brined and stored, the course of its decay is altered. Sugars are broken down to produce lactic acid, which protects it from spoiling. Carbon dioxide is released and the brine acidifies. It ages. Its color and texture transmute. Its flavor becomes tartar, more pungent. It exists in time and transforms. So it is not quite controlled death because it enjoys a new life altogether. The memories I had stored, I could not let fester, could not let trauma infiltrate and spread to spoil and render them useless. They were moments to be tended. The culture we shared was active, effervescent in my gut and in my genes, and I had to seize it, foster it so it did not die in me, so that I could pass it on someday. The lessons she imparted, the proof of her life lived on in me and in my every move and deed. I was what she left behind. If I could not be with my mother, I would be her. Thank you.
Wow, Michelle, gonna start us off so sweet. That was amazing. And I always love that scene because of the inventory of the photographs and then the fermentation process, which I think is a great metaphor for your work too. It seems to get sharper the deeper you go into it. And even after reading it, it seems to still be alive, still be shaping and moving, almost creating this life outside of you. It's doing its thing in the world. So thank you and congrats on this book.
Thank you, Eugene.
That was so good. And so there's an important theme in your memoir when your mother warns you to save 10% of yourself. And I feel like I've heard this as financial advice, as advice about emotional labor, about physical health, about relationships. I also connected to Maya Angelou says this wonderful thing about keeping a pristine part of yourself that nobody can touch, where nobody can hurt you. I'm wondering, how do you see this 10% for you and in your life today? And has it changed over the years?
Yes, that was so beautifully said. And yet I just really want my response to be just don't trust a bitch. That's like how I take that. I think like for my mom, she really instilled in me like there is no one you can trust except for me in this world, and like no one will ever love you the way that I love you. No one will die for you the way that your mother will, and never trust someone completely. And I really feel like maybe it's like it just didn't feel like an American sentiment where it growing up it was very difficult for me to understand because I felt like such a heart on the sleeve kind of person and such a like loved people so deeply and fully and wanted to have complete trust and wanted to give myself completely to other people that it was something that was very difficult for me to understand. She had this sort of stoic and withholding nature that I really envied and also feared and resented in many ways. And as you get older and you just encounter more people in the world, it just makes a lot more sense. I mean, it's not a romantic thing to say, to withhold like 10% of you. The way that you present it, I think is actually really, really beautiful and a beautiful way to take that. But for me, it was always like, don't trust anyone. Everyone is just concerned with themselves, and you need to know that going into the world and protect yourself from them. And I don't know how good of a job I do at saving 10%. Maybe it's more like a 5%. But I do think that it has saved me from many a time questioning people's motives all the time and not quite trusting completely, and always just knowing that things could go to shit at any moment. I think that that's a real immigrant mentality of just like, one of the many reasons I loved Minari when I watched it was I feel like in some ways like the Minari is the 10%. It is this seed that completely it's a seed that exists like after everything has completely gone to shit and fire has ravaged everything about all of the things that they've struggled to achieve, and they have to start all over again. They just have this seed to start over with. And I feel like that's hit me so hard as like having an immigrant parent and understanding like that kind of struggle of just always being ready to start over from nothing. Like I feel like in some ways that is a type of 10%.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just listening to you right now, and it reminds me of the way we might say leaving one more go, making sure there's enough in me to tackle something again. And it also makes me think, and this might feel really Korean, but makes me think that if things do go wrong, then the fault is with me, right? It's not.
I so feel that way. Yeah.
Get destroyed. It's actually my fault. I didn't leave the 5 to 10%. That's so interesting because I feel connected to you in that way with a childhood where your mom tells you save 10%, and then my adulthood is about saving less and less of it, where the strength is sort of inverted in a sense of, well, how much can I get hurt and still be okay without saving too much, I guess. But that's like the naive part speaking. So there are these two sections in the book, and I think they're perfectly on opposite ends of each other. And I couldn't stop bringing them closer in my mind and thinking about them in parallel. And it's the moment your mom says, more toward the beginning, but you're not Korean, you're American. And the other time is when you actually go to Korea toward the end and you explore, travel, you go to Jeju Island, you're really there. And what echoed for me is a few different things, like you're not Korean in the sense that you are free of the traditional roles of this Korean culture. And at the same time, maybe it's also saying you don't understand enough to know like what you can, not what you can claim, but what you want to claim. Like, do you want this? You know, it comes with a bunch of other stuff. So it's amazing that when you were traveling all around Korea, I was thinking, what does she think about that? Like, what does she think about the Korean American aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my relationship with Korea is so different now, you know. I think that as a kid, it just felt sort of intrinsically a part of me, and it could be mine on my terms, and I never really questioned it, you know. And there's the chapter early on where we go to Seoul, and like that is so true. Like it was something that I really didn't understand at that age. Some of the, you know, going to Korea and being Korean was just a joy as a child. You know, it was just a complete delight, and I was pretty there and doted upon by all these women. And, you know, I got to be, you know, coddled in this way. I got to go to, you know, Lotte World, and like my cousin took me to all the stationery shops, and, you know, it was like my 6-week vacation, you know, with all my family every other summer. It was so much fun. It was such a privilege. And then when, you know, I got in the book, I talk about, we went to the Korean folk village, and there was like a director who came up and gave my mom his card and asked her what my talents were, because I was this cute, you know, mixed race kid. I had sort of an interesting, they thought I had like some interesting look or something. And I was like, oh my God, this is my chance. You know, I can be famous. It's like, what are you doing? You know, and my mom just laughed, and, you know, she was like, you could never, even at that age, I remember she was just like, you could never, they would just kill you. You know what I mean? They would just suck the life out of you if you did something like that. And I was maybe like 10 or 11, and I already just had this real sense of American entitlement and this real independent streak. And I just had I was like, what are you talking about? I'll provide for the family, you know, I'll go like be a model or something. And, you know, even then she just knew that like I was going to hate it, because they were going to tell me how to dress. They were going to tell me what to eat, how to speak to people, what to think. And, you know, I would just throw such a fit if my mom even told me to wear a visor and I didn't want to wear a visor, you know? So now I understand a lot more what she was able to kind of protect me from, because like, you know, I think I didn't have like the self-consciousness of adolescence and adult life to understand the sort of pressures of Korean culture that were exhausting even to my mother. You know, there were by the time that we were going back and I was, you know, in my teenagers or a young adult together, I remember there was a lot of stuff that I realized that my mom had forgotten too and was exhausted by, you know, this like upkeep of appearances in this certain way, and even more withholding, even more like 10% sort of tucked away and hidden. Like I remember we went to Myeongjeong Gyoja, which is this kalguksu restaurant. And everyone in Korea, they eat really loudly. You know, it's like not taboo there to like slurp noodles and stuff like that. So everyone's like, like making all these sounds and sweating. And my mom like blew her nose in the restaurant. And my emo was just like, oh, like you can't just blow your nose in here. Like, and my mom was just like, what are you talking about? Everyone's making all of this sound, slurping their noodles, sweating. And like, why can't I blow my nose? And she had kind of like forgotten, you know, these certain things that you're supposed to keep hidden or something. This is maybe like TMI, but also like, I like never wear, this is maybe not appropriate for a literary event, but I'm just going to go there. I don't really like wear a bra or anything. So when I go to Korea, all of a sudden I like feel this pressure that like I need to, you know, like, or like everyone is very put together in this way. And I feel more so than even in like somewhere like New York, like I feel like, oh, I really have to like, you know, keep up appearances or something like that. And I've heard stories of friends visiting and not having dyed their hair. And then, you know, women kind of like whispering in the street, like, oh, she needs to get rid of her grays or whatever. There's just this like really intense, like critical nature of Korean people that I think I didn't even understand was something that my mom was like, oh, you hate what I do to you. You wait till you live in Korea. So I think that my relationship has really changed to it in that way. But yeah, I mean, I feel like my relationship to that country now is so different because I have to actively preserve it in this way that I never had, and that speaks so much to that sort of metaphor of preserving cabbage and relating it to my life of like, when my mom was alive, I didn't feel like it was my culture was something that I needed to preserve. It just was part of me unquestioned. And after my mom died, I realized like, if I want to keep this in my life, I need to actively make a space for it and actively engage with it. And so much of my interest in that sort of upkeep and visiting the country and traveling other parts of Korea and learning more about it is part of that upkeep of and preservation of my culture that I feel like is threatened now that my mom isn't here anymore.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. That was so beautifully put. And I really love how you respond, by the way. I feel like you go through these digressions and you have this essayistic form and you come back to the main theme. And so I really appreciate that. I love following like the shape of your thought,
And you're such a writer.
I'm doing too much right now. Sorry.
Love it.
Sometimes I see videos, I'm like, stop. So maybe that was a little pretentious, sorry.
No, it's not. I love it.
I have to say, like, when I go to jjimjilbangs, I have some tattoos. You obviously have some tattoos, and I do get called out about it, or I get some eyes. And I think the first time I was so taken aback by it, but after that I was just filled with curiosity, like, oh, why does this bother you? Or I just go closer to the harmony that really doesn't like me, and we become friends by the end of it. And I know that there's a part of each other that's been changed. So just thank you. I think you being you is enough, and it does something important, not just in this small, okay, I'm gonna stop, it's doing that thing. But so in a 2016 interview, so this goes a little back, you talk about working on your first release in a short period of time and said, I wanted a project where I didn't have time to edit myself. I felt really stuck, and it was a really good way of opening back up again. It's like this sick game that I play with myself to come up with raw source material. Oh, I just love that so much. I want to ask you about this process where it feels like you're outwitting yourself, you're tricking yourself into creation, into like real raw creation. Was writing your memoir like that?
That's a great question. So beautifully, Jay. Thank you. Very well said. It was part of it was like that, but there's also a part of it. I think that's one thing that's really beautiful about writing a book is there's truly no skipping steps, and part of me thought that I do tend to be a pretty fast worker. And I thought, I'm going to really whiz right through this, and it just doesn't work like that. And that's kind of really beautiful. It's sort of how grief works too. You can't, rush it. It's going to take its time and it's going to take all the steps. And it's really not up to you, but still, I think maybe it's the Korean in me. I just like homework in a way. And I like assigning myself things, and they can also function as sort of sick games. And I've just found, that really works for me. It really helps me to have those types of prompts that I create for myself and false, fake deadlines. So for this book, the way that Japanese Breakfast started was I wrote and recorded songs every day for the month of June, and I created all this source material. I had 30 really shitty songs, but were great jumping off points, and a lot of them ended up being some of my favorite raw source material for my favorite songs on the record that I just redid. And I think sometimes you need to just let it fly and then understand that so much of it is going to happen in revision. And I think a lot of writers will say that is that, so much of the book comes together over in the revision process. So for this book, the editor or the publisher was like, we want it to be 90,000 words, which was just a horrifying number, a real mountain. And so I wrote a lot of this book on tour. Honestly, I was like in cars and on planes and in the green room, at cafes between soundcheck and showtime. And I set out to write 1,000 words every day until I hit 90,000. And for the most part, I got to it. And a lot of it is just complete nonsensical garbage. But sometimes you write 1,000 words and there's one sentence or one inkling of an idea that just, is a huge, makes way for a huge chunk of it. And so I wrote 1,000 words every day until I hit 90,000. And then I went in and just slashed and dashed the book in half and then rebuilt it up and slashed it again and rebuilt it up. And that was the process for this. And, I think I would do it again, because I think that it is a great way to, just so much of work is just showing up every day, and it's a hard lesson to learn as a creative person, but it is such a necessary thing, I think, to learn to just show up every day and let it go. And hopefully by the end of the day, something great will come in the mess of all the other stuff. And some days it will be a lot, and most days it could be nothing. But it's become really important for me to create that kind of assignment for myself to create raw source material, and then have this whole other process of sifting through that and seeing what sticks.
And I'm so curious, what was the hardest part to write in the memoir?
Yes, that's easy. The hardest part for me was this chapter called Living and Dying, which was when my mom had just finished her second round of chemo, and, had said early on, like, I'm not going to continue if the tumor hasn't shrunk. And then we found out that the tumor didn't shrink, but she was in that place where her health was kind of felt stable. And even though the doctor had advised us not to go on this trip, she really wanted to go say goodbye to her family and her home country. We were going to stay in Seoul for a couple of days. We're going to go to Jeju and stay in a really nice hotel and just relax and enjoy each other. And we flew to Korea, and within 2 days, she was right back in the hospital. Just so her health just deteriorated so much. And, we had made this choice of like, we're going to gamble and we're going to try to live, in these last days, like to the fullest. And that gamble was lost in a big way. And it was just so sad, like watching her in that hospital lose everything. Her health just deteriorated so much. And she went into septic shock. And we thought she was going to die there. And it was a really difficult chapter for so many reasons. One was obviously it was so painful to remember my mom's symptoms, just the really graphic, horrible detail of that. And that was really hard. I cried a lot. Even when I read the audiobook, I thought I was going to cry a lot during the audiobook, but I only cried in that section because it was just such a beast to conquer. The other difficult thing was not knowing how far I could go. There was this sick part of me that went really far. I wanted to be graphic because it was just important to me, because I was so angry during that time that I'd never read something that had told me or warned me that this is a thing that happens, and just how grotesque the scene is of when someone's body is deteriorating. It was important for me to get down, like that kind of horror. And so being unsure of like, is this at my mother's expense if I share these details, that was kind of hard for me to let go. And also there was a really difficult part of trying to expand this time, that was hard for me to remember, honestly, because it was so traumatic. Like, my mom went into septic shock. The doctor told us, we're likely going to have to put her on a ventilator, and you're going to have to make this decision of how long she's going to be before you pull the plug. My dad and I went out to a bar, and I couldn't remember really like that conversation beyond a few words. Like, I remember him basically just saying, I guess this is it, but I couldn't really remember much more than that. So placing myself back into that moment to just make, where you're just like stretching time, because you have to like, it couldn't just be like, we went to a bar and we came back and she was okay all of a sudden. I had to really figure out how, pacing wise, to like stretch that period of time. And I kept just like revision after revision, just was like, it's not right. The pacing is wrong. It's like, why does she just, it makes it feel like there's not enough time going by. But I think actually one of my greatest challenges as a writer was I figured so much about writing, like working at that passage over and over again. And just like expanding upon like really mundane observations, I think is like a really beautiful thing, and infusing like character interiors into little things. Like I remember finding a way to just say, like, my dad looks out at the city, but he looks out at the city like he's looking for an answer or something, or like, he's like poking in a knot in the wood, but it's in the specific way. And then infusing this memory I didn't know what to do with, where my dad used to like drive me around on his motorcycle, and feeling like, oh, this is the right time to put that in there, because I really want him to take care of me right now, and he's not, and it's so frustrating. And the last time I really felt taken care of by him was in this moment when I was a kid, in this like very physical feeling. So really beautiful stuff comes out of like hitting your head at the wall for a long time. And so even though it was such a tough chapter to write, it was one of those rare occasions where you keep going at it, and eventually like you get something good, I think, which is kind of new for me as an artist, because I'm typically pretty impatient. So that coming back to that over and over again was really hard.
Right. Wow. I mean, I remember that scene, that whole chapter pretty vividly. And I do feel like, you've conquered that, because I don't like question the pacing, or the time or where we are. I'm just fully experiencing it. And I think that's like a result of some masterful writing, because you don't want someone to be like, pause, narrator, interjects and so on. You're just there, and it becomes a part of real life. It's no longer you're reading a writer. It's just, this is the way life goes. So thank you for taking the time to do that and to get it down. I think it completely paid off many times over. And I want to ask this question, because this next one, because I want to take a chance to celebrate you and celebrate your work, because we always hear a lot of other people's favorite parts about the book, or their favorite aspect of your work. And I want to ask, like, what do you like about this memoir? What do you like about your writing?
That's lovely. I think that my favorite parts are when you find a way for someone's like small human action or reaction to become representative of everything that they're feeling in that moment, and also your entire like history together. One of my favorite lines in the book actually is it feels like kind of like almost like a throwaway line. It's when another really difficult chapter for me to write was when my mom and I, had such a difficult time in my adolescence, and capturing like the heaviness of that moment. It's such a difficult thing to talk about, being depressed as a teenager, without making it seem like this, melodramatic thing, but also it's difficult to get the gravity of like how serious that time was. Like there's some embarrassment and shame that I feel of, oh, just everyone is a hormonal depressed teenager, and that was certainly a part of it, but it was also such a major moment in my mom and I's relationship that it never, really like was a fissure, and I had a really hard time writing about that honestly, and trying to present, how tough I was. It wasn't just my mom overreacting, it was also me being a little shit, and like and it's hard as if you're the protagonist to put yourself in that position of like, I was not perfect, and I'm embarrassed to admit I made a lot of mistakes that I regret, and I have to show them to you in detail. Otherwise it's not fair. And one of the lines that I really loved that I came up with was, she gave a little tisk, like she was passing a dilapidated building that was like made, was of beautiful architecture that had gone, that had deteriorated or whatever. That's obviously not the line, but is explained better in the book. But, I feel like a lot of people do, like, for me, that was such a perfect way to encompass, like, my mom is so disappointed that she provided me with this sort of beautiful architecture and I've just completely fucked it up, and she's looking at this girl that's just like, I gave you everything and yet it's still deteriorated and you didn't maintain it. And I also think that that's just a thing that people do driving in cars. If you pass, a beautiful building, like I think of, there's a beautiful hotel in Philadelphia called the Divine Lorraine that you just pass, and it's like, you just can see that it was once this gorgeous building that was so adored and cared for, and so much manpower and work and money went into the building, and it's just completely gone to shit. And I just thought, like, it's moments like that I'm really proud of finding, that are just really relatable, I guess.
I also love this line where you said, I'm not going to know the exact words. It's like you're dipping gochu in gochujang, and it's like the chili pepper combined with its like nearest dead cousin.
I'm so glad that you bring that up, because I definitely remember writing that and being like, does that fly? Like, I was like, I definitely remember that line very well and being like, is that gonna make sense to anyone? And so I'm really glad that you called that out. Yeah.
I remember reading that line and thinking, okay, food, language, inheritance, family. I was just counting what was going on and just the words. So, but I'm a nerd, and so I loved it. So thank you, even if it's for me. But so I want to ask you about Jubilee. So your new album coming out, Jubilee, is about joy. And so I'm so reminded about, I had this conversation with Alex Chi, and it's about when somebody asked him a question, where is the joy of being American? And it's something I'm thinking about, wondering how many times have I actually expressed joy in being who I am? Because I do a lot of the other thing, but how many times am I saying, I love being Korean American,
Yeah.
Where do you find this joy for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would like to believe that it exists in all of us, and it's, what keeps us going and what we're searching for always, For me, writing an album about joy was really exciting, because I felt like after I had written 2 albums largely about grief and loss, and then unpacking so much of that and purging it into this book, I was really able to close that chapter on my life. And I wanted to sort of fling myself to the other end of the spectrum of experience and write about something that I knew would surprise a lot of people and was unexpected, both because of my narrative as an artist, but also as, just the stereotype of, being a sad indie girl. It's not a normal thing to write about joy. But, I think that in a big way, finishing this book was so cathartic. And I turned in my rough draft in the late summer of 2019. My editor had it for 5 months. And in that 5-month period, I wrote and recorded most of this album, Jubilee. And I felt like it was, especially writing this book, it was like I was falling back into a familiar bed, and I was just so joyful to like play, write music again and produce it with my friend. And, I just had more confidence writing an album because I've done it before, whereas a book was so new for me. It was, writing music and producing it is just so much more collaborative. So, I just wanted to like write these like really sweet, joyful songs, and they're not all happy songs, but they're all about fighting for joy or preserving joy, sustaining joy. And I just thought it was a really beautiful shift. I was thinking about this today actually, because I've been very happy this weekend, and maybe that just like coincides well with APAM, but like I had a wonderful like Korean. I actually had two really wonderful Korean meals in the last 2 days. I went to Coat in New York with these three like Korean unnies, you know, they're all like very accomplished. And it was just such a Korean, I never grew up with like a lot of Korean friends. And this is like a real new thing for me, getting to like I feel like you don't even realize you want it until you have it. And then you realize like all these years, like what you've been really missing, that you don't have to explain certain things and that you can just like relate to each other. Like I never had that, like up until maybe the last like 3 or 4 years. And like having that in my life is like such a joy that I never even felt I was missing, you know? And over the course of this dinner, it was like, we talked about our families. We all like, you know, like there was like a white server was like, oh, and we're bringing over some like omu kimchi. And we were like, oh, thank you. And he left and we're like, what is omu kimchi? Like, what is he talking about? And we just get to have this kind of like, you know, rapport that you just immediately have with other people who have the similar experience. And like, you know, I never spent time with these three women, but it was like we like by the middle of it was like drinking, laughing, crying, talking about death. Like it just, you just are able to like go in such a deep way. And I feel like there is maybe sometimes I worry that I'm reading too into it culturally, or I don't want to, you know, obviously we're not a monolith, but I do feel like there is a specific like Korean sensitivity and feeling of just like there is a withholding part, but there's also like I don't know, there's like a real poetic type of feeling that I don't feel as deeply with my other friends in this way. And I don't want to like isolate anyone, but like I do feel that, and that's a real joy, having this like this thing I've just never been able to talk to about anyone, or know that like, you know, for so long I thought that, you know, all of this stuff was idiosyncratic to like my mother's character. And now I just realize all along it's like a big cultural thing, and that so many people have this experience, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it might be this word, but the word you might be searching for is chong.
Tongue, yeah.
Korean chong, right? It's this indescribable love and bond, and it's almost like an umbilical cord, I guess. It's a chong you can have for objects or things or experiences, but I remember when my partner like serves someone rice, I always like teach him serve them twice, and he's like, why? And so otherwise you have no chong. And he's like, well, what if I don't have a lot of chong? I was like, no. You want to always give more than you take. You always like, those are things that I don't think anyone necessarily sat down and taught me, but it's just part of being the family that for me, it's give more than you take. If you get a gift, it's not like receiving a gift. It's more like, oh, this is a burden. Now I have to give them more back. Or those are some of the feelings. But I think within that restriction and pain and these other words like Han, I think there's this deep joy and love. Like it makes those other things accessible, you know, like the dark parts come with the really great, light, beautiful parts. So we're going by so fast on time. Last question we'll see here, but so your memoir touches on languages, you know, and just, I mean, beyond Korean and English, we come to music as a language, but maybe the language that's most central and present is the language of food, the language of eating. And it seems to be a way to communicate when words, they can't make up the difference. So the language of food, and I love how you unravel this, has histories like naengmyeon from North Korea, spam as a symbol of militarism in Korea. But I mean, can you talk about the language of food and how you're using that language and what it does for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that early on, I knew that it was going to be this major thematic vehicle for the book. The first essay that I wrote was about my relationship with Mangchi for Glamour in 2016. And then I started writing this book in late 2017 and started with, it's almost like if you give a mouse a cookie, like, because I was following Mangchi, I ended up going to H Mart and once a week. And so it almost began with like two odes, it was like this ode to Mangchi and this ode to H Mart. And so then I started really investigating my life in this way of just different moments of food playing a major role in my life. And there was also, it was important to me. I remember I was in Korea, like, I think I must have read this in like January of 2018. I got a copy of Han Kang's The Vegetarian while I was living in Seoul writing the beginning of this book. And, I'm really struck by, mostly food memoirs about the real joys of food. And here was this book that was this really haunting book about the food as like a grotesque thing, and the horror of food. And I thought that, that was also a really important, it unlocked something in me where I realized like that was a really important part of the book too, to talk about, and it was a great arc in that way because, in my childhood, food was such a joyous thing that connected me to my heritage. I was a mixed race kid that had two different dinners every night. I got to pick between, and it was always a celebration. My mom was always missing her family and her country in this way. And so her way of interacting with that and was through food. So it brought her great joy. And so I grew up with this feeling that food was joy. And then over, when she went through chemotherapy, all of the joy was taken out of food. And there was this real, horrifying 6 months of our lives where we were counting calories and food was sustenance and food was this evil thing that was, taking all of the joy out of our lives because we were so worried about her not eating enough, and eating for her was so exhausting and so unenjoyable. And, and then I think so much of the end of the book is kind of recovering that joy and finding, like redeeming that joy. So I always knew that it was going to play a major role in that way. And then it was just really fun to kind of play with food in these different ways of, similarly, like talking about how, one small moment can do many different things at once, and finding all of those types of times in which like if you're going to introduce a dish, it has to represent, sort of other things. So that was a really fun part of writing the book, of just finding how deeply you could go and how big you could make a small component of it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so interesting because some time has passed since the end of the memoir and where you are now. And it's almost like there's younger versions of you living on in the memoir out in the world as you continue to sort of live your life. Maybe that was a little nerdy, but I'm wondering if you could give your younger self, I mean, any younger version of yourself, some advice on life, it could be about writing. What would it be?
I mean, I just like, things really worked out for me in a way that I just didn't, things did not look good for a while, for a really long time. And it really just turned around, and I'm so glad that it did, because I feel like when you're a young creative, you just feel like a crazy person because no one believes you. And I came very close to never getting this chance, because at 25, I gave up. I did. And I got very lucky that I made this record, Psychopomp. I wrote this essay, Love, Loss, and Kimchi, while I was working in an advertising company. And I just said, basically just one more, and that was the one that just like did it for me, because it came very close to never happening for me. I mean, as I get older, it's the 10%, just this little seed. Why not? Yeah, it was basically like the one chip that you like put on the table, just like, well, I have nothing left to lose, let's just see what happens. And you win, I don't know how roulette works, but you win all the chips back. But yeah, I mean, for me, like, I guess, like I've tweeted before, like, so the most Korean thing about me is that all of my joy is rooted in vengeance, because I feel like I love that I would have told my younger self, like, everyone that peaks in high school ends up being literally the worst person. And I would so love to, like, me now as a 32-year-old go to like my 16-year-old self and just be like, listen, let me tell you about like what happens to this girl, you know, because like, I was just so jealous of everyone when I was a teenager, and I was so confused, and I was so sensitive and so emotional, and all of those things that I hated about myself are what brought me to this point, and they're the things that I use for this work, and it all makes sense now, and it all worked out. And I wish I could just tell her that, you know, because she would be so tickled by it.
Oh my gosh, this is so great. I mean, I remember I used to do like spoken word, my open mics, spoken word, and I mean, I'm into it. I love it. But I used to do that. I was just so young, and I remember people would ask me like, "Why do you do that?" And I go, "Oh, it's for revenge. It's like that microphone is where I go up and I go off. You know, that's where
Yeah.
let all the secrets go." But it's funny listening to you because I feel similarly in that I think there was like a year in, it must have been like 2016 or so, where I gave up writing. I was like, oh, I'm just not going to write anymore. And that's really when everyone sort of started approaching me and being like, we want to like put this out. We want to do this. And I was like, I'm so confused. I quit, you know, I'm done. I tried my best.
I
And
retired.
I'm done, you know, I'm gonna go live a happier life. But I've just reaffirmed something for me that I don't know how to articulate, but I feel deep down that there's something about letting go that brings things forward. So I'm gonna ask you some Q&A from the audience here. Both EJ's and Michelle's memoirs revolve around their relationships with their Korean mothers. How do you balance the emotional line between honoring your mother and also being honest about their flaws, traumas, imperfections? I too am half Korean on my mother's side, and I always struggle in my own writing with the overwhelming love and admiration I have for my mother, while also not wanting to sugarcoat her flaws and mistakes.
That's beautiful. DJ, do you want to answer?
No, you go.
You go. I would love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll share mine if you
How
have
do I
any.
balance the thought between the emotional line? I mean, if I was being really honest here, I think the first few drafts, people might be surprised to hear they were really mean, and they were really, and they were just, almost like what I would write in a journal or a diary entry. And it's the editing when I had to go back and add sort of the magnanimity. I talk about this a lot with poetry, is it's not a poem unless you can end it with magnanimity. And that practice became a really practical one when thinking about my relationships. And so it's revision after revision that I think helped me get the rage down, get the grief down, and then come back in with understanding contextually what that means.
For me, I feel like it was really always a very important thing to showcase the depth of a Korean mother's love, but also this very special type of cruelty, you know. Like, I think that that's honestly, like, you know, it's part of what makes that love really beautiful for me. And it was something I absolutely hated and resented tremendously when I was growing up. But you know, I think that maybe because my mom passed away, it's something that I feel very strongly, like, you know, I understand why my mother did what she did, and you know, I forgive her for them, and I understand that I would rather have her be that way in retrospect than any other way. But yeah, I mean, it was always really important to me to go really hard on both, you know, and I feel like that's just what makes a person is that they are problematic, you know, and that they're really, yeah, I mean, you can't have all of these really great things without having some major flaws. And it was always really, really important for me to show both sides of my mom in that way, because that's what made her real and unique and interesting.
I just love the part where your mom, you know, kind of bets like I bet $100 that Peter's gonna go for the scrub, you know, like those moments really, like her humor, her funniness, her sort of like quickness. I just felt all of those things were really brought out too, you know.
Thank you.
The next question, I have really enjoyed your music and was so excited when I saw you were writing a memoir because one, I am a writer and musician. Two, I am a fellow half Korean, my mom as well,
Oh, lots of happies in the chat.
and found it so inspiring to see someone like me. I was wondering how you handle and feel confident in your identity. I often feel like I have to pick a side and feel like I don't fit in either culture, leaving me floating somewhere on my own.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is a part of our experience as mixed race people. You know, I have some friends who have had mixed race children, or some mixed race friends say, you know, I don't like to consider myself half Korean, half American. I'm whole Korean, I'm whole American. And as beautiful of a sentiment as that is for me, it's just not something I identify with at all. I feel very much that being half and half is a huge part of my identity, and that feeling of this sort of being like this kind of cultural vagabond and not really having this like full sense of belonging anywhere is a really big part of the mixed race experience. And I remember talking to Mitski about this, actually, who's half Japanese musician, and she said something along the same lines of like, you know, we don't belong anywhere, and there's something really beautiful about that. And that really stuck with me, and I think so much of this book is about and maybe also what you're experiencing too as a mixed race person who's also creative, is that there's this real desire for belonging and understanding. And I think that really fuels like our desire to create a space in which we do belong. You know, for me as an artist, I think I'm really propelled by this feeling of not belonging anywhere and wanting to create this sort of space for myself where I just will, you know, unquestionably belong all the time. And I feel like the book sort of ends this way, where I'm, you know, in Korea, but I'm on a stage, and I have made this space for myself to belong. And I think even before I would say I'm a Korean woman or an American woman, I would say I'm an artist. I think that is like the identity that I feel the most strongly connected to. And so I think that that's a very normal thing to have those desires and those feelings. I think that they can work together really well, actually.
Thank you. Another question. Hello, Michelle. I just ordered your book from Third Place Books a few days ago and can't wait to read it. I'm an aspiring writer. Just wondering if you could speak to your experiences with rejection in your writing career. I get pretty tired of it. LOL. Thank you. I read the LOL. I should.
It's important for context. That would have been so heavy if the LOL wasn't there. I love this question. I have had a pretty charmed experience and a very not charmed experience. I was a musician. I started playing in bands since I was 16 years old. I slept on, I did DIY tours. I did so many DIY tours, and I would work in restaurants and then get fired when I went on 3-week tours that made no money. I would sleep on floors. I'd play in basements where there would be maybe 5 kids there. It was a real slog. And then, I gave it up at 25. I was like, if it hasn't happened now, and I have been paying my dues for the past 9 years, I have to give it up. It's, I did my best. But then there was, the Psychopomp album that I remember too. I was like, I shopped it to all of these different labels, like not even any label that anyone would know. They were really small. They were my friends' labels, and they didn't even want to put it out. And eventually there's this small label called Yellow K Records, who ran a vape store in Frostburg, Maryland, that paid to have this little pet shop, this little pet project. And they put out the record, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to tour because, I've done that, and I have health insurance now. I have to hold on to this. And they're like, that's fine. We're going to hire a PR person. And I was like, great, your loss of money. This is never going to sell more than 500 copies for the like next 10 years. And of course that record like was the one, it just took me completely giving up in order for it to happen. Around that same exact time, I had written this essay called Love, Loss, and Kimchi. And I sent it everywhere. I sent it to Vice, I sent it to Munchies, I sent it to Lucky Peach, and I didn't even want to get paid. I just wanted it. I just wanted to release it to the world, And I applied to every single literary contest without an entry fee. And then, 9 months went by. And every month or so, I'd get a rejection letter from this place that I didn't even remember submitting it to because I just sent it. And then 9 months later, I got an email. I thought it was spam from Glamour magazine that was like, you won our essay contest of the year. You won $5,000. And I was like, I don't even remember submitting to them, because I just sent it to so many people that I just had completely forgot. And that was the essay that changed everything, that started all of this, And so I feel like it's just, you have to be, it sucks. It's exhausting. It's so devastating. It's a horrible lifestyle, but you have to just be relentless, and it helps to just do something else while you're doing that on the side, maybe, and to just forget about it. And also the number one important thing to learn, I think, is that just because no one wants it, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just hasn't gotten into the right hands yet. And it hasn't, or it could not be the right time, like that is the major lesson for me, is that, all of these people rejected this essay, and only it just took one person to get into the one right hands, and the one, person going through that thing in their life to like relate to it or see something that other people can't see in order for it to like blow up in this way. So don't get discouraged because it just hasn't gotten into the right hands yet,
I feel so pumped right now. I'm gonna go on a submission.
It's not you, it's them.
I'm gonna submit so many things after that. As your creative process shifted during the writing of your memoir, I was wondering if you experienced a similar shift or a completely new approach in your songwriting.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I felt like I changed so much as a writer, and I learned so much about myself as a creative in writing this book. And I think I won't know exactly how those things will pay off until I write another book. But I'm so excited to take what I learned from this book because, I just walked away with so much from this. I don't know if it had anything to do with, I don't know if it really shifted my experience as a songwriter. And maybe this, for this new record, I feel like I'm just always trying to push myself. I never want to get caught like resting on any laurels. That's like a big thing for me. So I took some guitar lessons and some piano lessons, and it's just always important, I think, like to treat your creative work, I don't know, like to understand the importance of education. I think with music, like that's maybe not something that people do very often, that like is maybe more consistent with book writing in a way. Is that you hear about a lot of these like retreats or workshops or writing groups or master's programs or whatever, like this type of like education that can enhance your writing in this way that I don't feel like musicians talk about very often. And so I guess in that way that might have had something to do with why I was like, I need to get some more like education. I need to like up my chops in this way. So I did take some guitar lessons, piano lessons, and dove a little bit more into theory, which I had been, very willfully ignorant of in a big way, and that really helped me. So I wrote a lot more songs on the piano for this record, which was fun and exciting. And I also wrote string and brass arrangements for the first time. I pushed myself to do that, and that was really an exciting part of the process. And so I think it is my best work because of that.
That's amazing. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've got like so many questions coming in. I might just ask you a last one.
Great. Thank you so much, EJ. You've been so wonderful and thoughtful. And I have loved this conversation so much. And I'm very glad to get to meet and chat with you.
Thank you. This has been so fun. I remember after I finished your book, I thought you've given me several gifts and several ways of looking at my own work and my own process. So this has been as great for me. And so the last question is, I just wanted to know if you've been able to move your mom's kimchi fridge to your home, and if so, have you been able to fill it up?
I love that question. I was able to move my mom's kimchi fridge into my home. My husband and I got like a little house upstate and put the kimchi fridge up there. And I actually grew some cabbages and chonggakmu in my yard, and I did put them in there. I haven't been up there in like a few months, and my kimchi has been in there for a long time, honestly. So maybe it's very funky now, and we'll make some good stews. Hopefully it's not too funky, but yeah, I have filled it up, and it is a very nice thing, and it feels very full circle to have it in my home and filled with my kimchi. And I think of my mom every time I see it.
And it feels so full circle that we started the conversation on fermenting.
Yeah, with the chapter, yeah.
Came back on for fermenting in your kimchi fridge. So thank you so much.
Thank you, EJ.
Yes,
thank you so much.
EJ. Yes, thank you, EJ. Thank you, Michelle. This has been such an amazing event. I've been following everyone's great comments in the chat. Everyone's been finding such great meaning into your conversation here. It's been absolutely incredible to hear both of you actually made reference to having nearly quit at one point, quitting your writing or something like that. It's pretty unreal to have such a great dialogue tonight. I'm very honored to have been a part of it in some way. Again, I want to thank all our viewers for watching and buying their books. Again, I shared the link again in the comments there. Please make sure to support Third Place Books, support our great authors by making sure you buy a copy of their books. They are truly wonderful books. Again, here they are. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to log us off and end the event. I'll let EJ and Michelle say the last word. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, EJ. Thank you, Third Place Books.
Bye.
Bye.